coming up on Your Europe, new ways to counter terrorism. Stay tuned to find out more. This is Haragioka. Welcome to Actua TV. Welcome to Your Europe. According to European Commission's data, more than 4,000 EU nationals are estimated to have joined terrorist organizations in countries experiencing conflict such as Syria and Iraq. The same data revealed the majority of the terrorist suspects implicated in the recent terrorist atrocities in the EU to be European citizens born and raised in Europe. These shocking facts pushed Europe to reinforce its policies as it comes to European citizens' security by applying a strategy that tries to, on the one hand, prevent radicalization and the participation in terrorist organizations, but on the other, to protect borders better. But in particular, how is Europe tackling the situation? How is trying to fight radicalization and online propaganda that terrorists are using to establish themselves within the EU? Joining me to the episode, the EU counterterrorism coordinator, Mr. Gilles De Kerchove. Mr. De Kerchove, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, to begin with, in front of the series of terrorist attacks, we've seen the situation in Paris, we've seen it in Brussels, but also outside the EU. We've seen recently the case of Orlando in the United States. We've seen the case of Atatürk Airport in Istanbul, Turkey. What is Europe doing to counter terrorism?
Europe is very mobilized. The European Commission, the European External Action Service, the Council, myself, we work hard and we are trying to implement what heads of state and government ask us to do in three main directions. First, improve the repressive response. What does it mean? Improve the way we share information between all the players, the intel community, the law enforcement community, the prosecutors, and so on. So connect the dots, as the Americans said after 9/11. Remove the stovepipes. So that's one. Second, try to improve the fight against terrorist financing. Dry up the resource of Daesh. Three, improve the criminal justice response. That means we have to adopt a common definition of all the behaviors, which we need to call terrorism. We need to access and get a speedy access to digital evidence because we want to try to convict these foreign terrorist fighters. And three, we have to solve the problem of encryption. These guys are using more and more encrypted devices, so we have to crack that out. So that's the repressive response, and be better at the external border, because we've seen some of the foreign terrorist fighters going back and forth to Syria and using the migration route. So that's the first set of policy. The second one, equally important, is prevent. How do we prevent people from getting radicalized in the first place? So that means working on internet, we'll come to that. That means to try to train people so that they can detect as early as possible signs of radicalization so that we can provide a non-security response. It's also set up a rehabilitation program because we'll have to digest the return of hundreds of foreign terrorist fighters who have been trained, military trained in Syria and Iraq, brainwashed. So we need to digest that and handle that in a proper way. Otherwise, we'll repeat the mistake we did when the Russians withdrew from Afghanistan. We left this mujahideen that some of us have been supporting into the wild, and we know the consequence of that. And finally, the external aspect, the Minister of Foreign Affairs asked Mrs. Mogherini, the High Representative for Foreign Policy, to mobilize the system more in support of all the countries around the Mediterranean, or direct neighborhood, from Morocco to Turkey, including the Western Balkans, and we're in the process of helping them and developing counterterrorism partnership.
You mentioned internet, and your personal position, and I'm quoting you here, is to reduce both the physical and virtual caliphate. May you explain this expression of yours further?
The physical caliphate is very much degraded thanks to the anti-ISIL coalition, thanks to the Iraqi army, the Peshmerga, the PYD, and so on. So they are quite successful, and I think one can safely say that within a year, the physical caliphate of Daesh will be destroyed. That does not mean that all the people will be killed. They may move to Libya, to other hotspots. But the virtual caliphate is still pretty active. What is the virtual caliphate? It's the way they use social network to propagate their rhetoric, their ideas, and try to seduce people, to communicate, to give instruction. And so we have to be much more active on this. It requires a solid partnership with the internet companies.
You're actually referring on online propaganda and that we need to reduce online propaganda. The same way, don't you believe that we need to reduce also radicalization and Islamophobia?
We need to work, as I said, work a lot on radicalization. It's in a way a vicious circle. You have a rise of extreme right ideas, Islamophobic ideas in Europe. That's in a way linked, correlated to the massive flows of migrants entering the EU, mainly Muslim. And we have to help a lot in this integration process, because otherwise it will feed these feelings, which in turn might lead to some sort of radicalization as well. So indeed, it is very important. The Vice President of the Commission, Timmermans, has appointed someone in charge of Islamophobia, someone on anti-Semitism as well. He has organized quite interesting meeting. We are working on it because we believe it is not acceptable at all. So we have to fight Islamophobia, indeed, very much so.
Europol these days is trying to counter terrorism by communicating companies, social media companies such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and let them know to be aware about the content that might be violent and is not just against other legal authorities, but is also against the companies themselves. Can we say that is this an efficient measure? Is it enough?
I think so. So we believe we have to work in two directions. One is to remove from this different platform unlawful content. Not distasteful content, because that's freedom of speech, but unlawful. So rhetoric calling for violence, for terrorism. To do that, we have to work on different ways. First, to ask the companies to be more proactive themselves. They have to design themselves the mechanism to clean up their platform. They do it for pedopornography, for instance, material. So they remove it in an automated way. But they have also set up referral mechanism by which you and we can flag something we find unlawful, and they remove it from the platform. It's based on, and we can specialize people to do it, either public authorities or inside society. So public authority, we look at what the Brits were doing at Scotland Yard, where they set up an internet referral unit. These are people who are trained to distinguish between unlawful content and unacceptable or distasteful content. And Google told us when they flagged something to Google or Facebook or Twitter, whatever, Google removed the content in 93% of the time. When you and we do flag something, they only remove it in 33% of the time. Why? Because we're not trained to make that distinction. So that's the reason why we have set up at Europol a similar internet referral unit, for the time being 20 guys, trained to do so. They have special arrangement with the internet company, and they have nearly reached the same strike rates. So they are successful in 90% of the time. This is not enough. We need to do that more. So we need to identify in civil society, NGO, which could be trusted partners who can flag more, who are specialized on it. So you need the users, specialized body, trusted flaggers, and internet and official body like the Europol Internet Referral Unit, and to scale that up, as well as the work of the company themselves.
Well, Mr. Kerchove, I have to sincerely thank you.
My pleasure.
And thank you all of you. See you next week.